Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Today, one from Russia, the other from the US. Sergei Lavrov, John Kerry, the US Special Envoy on Climate Change. Both came with very different agendas, interestingly on the same day, and stayed at the same hotel. On Gravitas tonight, as we recap the day's events with details and outcomes of their respective meetings, we want to bring your attention to a trend. A string of major diplomatic engagements for India, from regional security to bilateral ties and global affairs, world leaders are flocking to New Delhi. What does this signify? That in a post-pandemic world, India has emerged as one of the most important stakeholders in global affairs. We'll discuss all of that. Also on the show, young people are driving the latest pandemic surge, but only 14 countries in the world are vaccinating all people above 18 years of age. American and Chinese ships move in as the battleground of South China Sea heats up. We'll bring you the very latest. Americans are suffering an unforeseen but serious consequence of the pandemic. They're running out of ketchup. We'll tell you why. And if you're planning to go to Mecca for the Hajj, make sure you're vaccinated. That's your new Hajj passport. We'll tell you all about it. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Iran and the United States are holding indirect talks in Vienna as part of a wider effort to revive the nuclear deal between Tehran and global powers. Tehran has ruled out face-to-face bilateral discussions. The State Department has said that it expects the talks to be difficult. The former Crown Prince of Jordan has pledged allegiance to King Abdullah 2 days after he said he was placed under house arrest and accused of trying to destabilize the country. Prince Hamza bin Hussein issued a statement hours after mediating, saying he was committed to the constitution. The International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook has projected India's growth rate to jump to 12.5% for fiscal year 2021 to 22, also raising its growth forecast for China to 8.4%. The IMF has projected the global economy to grow at 6% in 2021 and 4.4% in 2022. China's Navy has said that its drills near Taiwan will become regular in a further escalation of tensions near the island that Beijing claims as its sovereign territory. This as a Chinese carrier group led by the Liaoning, the country's first aircraft carrier, put into active service its exercising near Taiwan. Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has blamed vulgarity for rise in rape and sexual violence in Pakistan instead of the deteriorating law and order situation in the country, sparking social media outrage by netizens. The World Health Organization has not backed requiring vaccine passports for entry or exit due to uncertainty over whether inoculation prevents transmission of the virus, as well as equity concern. Israel's president has nominated Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try to form a government following the latest inconclusive election, where no party got enough seats to form a government. In a phone conversation with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi has expressed strong concerns to his Chinese counterpart about Chinese incursions into territorial waters, the situation in Hong Kong and the human rights situation of China's Uyghur minority. North Korea has become the first country to pull out of this summer's Tokyo Olympics due to the pandemic. It says the decision was made to protect its athletes from COVID-19 last month, although the IOC has said it has not yet been formally intimated about the withdrawal. It is a blow to South Korea's hopes of using the Games to engage with the North amid stalled cross-border talks. North Korea last boycotted the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul during the Cold War. Barcelona have moved to within 1 point of La Liga leaders Atletico Madrid after a late 1-0 win over Real Valladolid at the NOU camp. Both teams hit the woodwork in the first half, but Barcelona were repeatedly frustrated as they rained down a total of 25 attempts on goal. But Valladolid were reduced to 10 men in the 79th minute, and Ousmane Dembélé capitalized with a 90th minute winner. Barcelona have won 12 out of their last 13 games to surge back into title contention.
It was a hectic day for Indian diplomats. India was hosting two high-profile leaders today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and US Special Envoy for Climate John Kerry. What makes this all the more crucial is the dynamics between Russia and the US. You know, they're arch enemies. Their presidents call each other names. But their top diplomats were in New Delhi at the same time. Was this a coincidence? Possibly. But we're not surprised that their schedules overlapped. That's because India has had a very busy month. The first ever Quad summit, then the visit of Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin, the Afghan Foreign Minister's India tour, and now these two leaders from Moscow and Washington. World leaders are actively engaging with India. This is turning out to be the summer of high-profile engagements. Let's look at what happened today. Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry arrived in India's national capital yesterday. Both of them are on different missions. The Russian foreign minister was here to prepare the ground for an annual summit that will be held later this year. The American, John Kerry, was meeting different stakeholders to discuss climate goals. Let's start with the Russian mission. Sergei Lavrov met India's Foreign Affairs Minister S Jaishankar. They discussed a whole lot of issues: the UN Security Council, Afghanistan, West Asia, the Gulf, Myanmar, ASEAN, space, the Indo-Pacific, and vaccine production. India and Russia vowed to deepen their defense cooperation, and they're looking for ways to expand the production of Russian weapons in India. And this is despite the threat of American sanctions. Remember, the US sanctions countries that buy Russian weapons. And India is a big buyer of Russian weapons. The latest purchase is the Russian S-400 missile defense system. The delivery is expected in December this year. Will the US sanction India? There's no clarity yet. More importantly, there's no assurance yet from Washington that Delhi will not face sanctions. As for Delhi and Moscow, they say they remain committed to strong defense ties.
Our ties, I'm sure Minister Lavrov would agree, have remained uniquely strong and steady. And the reason for that has been our consistent ability to identify and update our shared interests. We are both cognizant of the multipolar and rebalanced nature of international relations today. We both understand the importance of our relationship to global peace, security, and stability. And therefore, as foreign ministers, we work hard to deliver on that responsibility.
The other elephant in the room was China. Sergei Lavrov said that Russia is watching the border situation in Ladakh. He addressed a joint press conference with India's S Jaishankar. He was asked a pointed question on this. Is Russia working on a military alliance with China? His answer was no. But then he went on to speak about another so-called military alliance in the region, the Quad.
In the course of the Russia-China summits, where we said that our relations are at their highest in the history, but these relations do not pursue a goal of establishing a military alliance. By the way, we've heard speculations about pro-military alliances not only regarding Russia-China relations. We also heard about such alliances allegedly being promoted such as Middle East NATO, and we also heard about Asian NATO. Today we exchanged views on this, and our Indian friends have the same position as we. We believe that this is counterproductive. We are interested in inclusive cooperation.
India's position is very clear here. It will not engage in a NATO-like military alliance with the Quad, and that is a challenge for Delhi. Striking the right balance between Russia and the Quad. Meanwhile, Lavrov has already left India and landed in Pakistan. That is his next destination, and that makes the India. We'll talk more about this in just a bit. For the moment, let's also turn to John Kerry, the US Special Envoy. He is going to be in India for 4 days, and he is not going to Pakistan. The US President, Joe Biden, has appointed Kerry as a special envoy on the climate crisis. It's a position that includes a seat on the US National Security Council. Now, this council is the principal forum for the US president to discuss national security. What does this tell you? It means that the US has put climate change at par with national security priorities. So what is Kerry doing in India? Meeting representatives from the government, the private sector and NGOs. Today he met India's Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. What was the purpose? To get India to commit on climate action, to cut back on the use of fossil fuels. Now remember, India too has been at the forefront of climate action and sustainable development goals. Joe Biden has formed an alliance of like-minded countries to take this forward. And John Kerry was all praises for India. Calling India a world leader in deployment of renewable energy, Kerry said India is setting a quote-unquote very strong example for other nations. So that's how the day panned out for Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry. You may be wondering if their paths crossed. Did Lavrov meet Kerry in New Delhi? The answer is yes, they did. And they were staying in the same hotel. They met in the lobby, we are told. What did they talk about? Climate change. That's what the Russians have told the press. The Americans, on the other hand, are much more guarded about this meeting. The US Embassy in Delhi said that the leaders, and I'm quoting, ran into each other by happenstance. Believe what you will. We will not comment on the statement. We'll give you a short backstory instead. When John Kerry was the US Secretary of State in the Obama years, there was a lot of talk about the bromance between him and Lavrov. On several occasions, the leaders have exchanged gifts as well. Once, Kerry had gifted Lavrov 2 potatoes from Idaho. Why? Because the Russian had mentioned them in an earlier conversation. Then Lavrov returned the favor with some tomatoes from Sochi. He'd even gifted a T-shirt to Kerry with symbols of victory. That was almost 6 years back. Now their presidents are hurling abuses at each other. But why should that stop them from a quick catch-up in New Delhi? In the meantime, this on-off relationship between Washington and Moscow poses a problem for Delhi, a dilemma. Russia is India's biggest defense partner, and America is a key partner in the Indo-Pacific. So far, India has carefully built an independent relationship with both these countries. But as the friction between the Kremlin and the White House increases, India is walking a diplomatic tightrope. Our next report explains.
A Cold War ally and an Indo-Pacific partner. One has been a critical source of military equipment. The other is crucial for safeguarding strategic interests. In maintaining one partnership, India has been careful not to damage the other. It has enjoyed an independent relationship with both Moscow and Washington. This has been the state of play for several years. But the US-Russia acrimony is entering a new phase. A new president is in the White House. He is trying to distinguish himself from his predecessor and assert America's place in the world. Words have been flying like missiles.
You know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm. I do.
You know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
Mm-hmm. I do.
And you know, I remember in my childhood, when we argued in the courtyard, we used to say, it takes one to know one.
In this growing friction between the two superpowers, India faces the real test. Which way will it tilt? So far, New Delhi has successfully struck a balance. In February, India's Foreign Secretary traveled to Moscow for a 2-day visit. In March, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited India. Now the US climate envoy, John Kerry, is in New Delhi. And so is Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. India is actively engaged with both countries. But one bargain hangs above India-US ties, like the sword of Damocles. The S-400 deal. New Delhi's decision to purchase this anti-aircraft missile system from Russia has raised the risk of US sanctions. America has imposed sanctions on Turkey for a similar deal with Russia. The delivery in India is due in December, and the Pentagon has not indicated that it won't impose sanctions on India. On the other hand, Moscow's biggest worry is India's growing security ties with the United States.
I thank President Biden.
Prime Minister Modi attended the first ever Quad summit last month.
Excellencies.
Signs of discomfort has surfaced at the Kremlin. Russia, along with China, is proposing a new regional security bloc aimed at countering any US-led blocs. It already seems to be laying the groundwork. Lavrov will be visiting Islamabad after his India visit. This will be the first such visit by a Russian foreign minister in 9 years. So the challenge before India is quite complex. It comes at a crucial time. Right across the Himalayas, the Chinese still pose a significant threat to India's security. New Delhi will have to choose wisely. It will have to ask serious questions about American reliability in the face of this potent threat, and align its approach in the Indo-Pacific in a way that does not damage the Delhi-Moscow dynamic. As the stakes go higher, the balancing act will only become tougher for India. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In medieval India, the royal courts buzzed with foreign dignitaries. Back then, India was a trading hub, a military power with huge standing armies. So Indian friendship was a strategic goal. Today, centuries later, we are witnessing a revival of sorts. A global realignment is underway and India finds itself at the center of it. New Delhi is preparing for a busy summer, a summer of diplomacy. It started with a Quad summit in the month of March. It was the first head of state level meeting. For India, it was also a new chapter. Remember, New Delhi is a non-aligned power. It has stayed away from political alliances. The Quad is the closest that India has come to joining one. So, has India abandoned the commitment to neutrality? Well, far from it. The Quad is an exercise in deterrence. In the Indo-Pacific, it just wants China to follow the rules. And as the only Quad member that shares a border with China, the stakes are higher for India. But so are the opportunities. The West sees India as a bulwark against China's rise, and for a change, they're right. In the next few years, New Delhi could become one of the most powerful capitals in the world. Today, India hosted top officials from the US and Russia. Not many countries in the world can do that. But New Delhi is neutral turf. It has excellent ties with both Moscow and Washington. Lavrov has left. Kerry will leave in a few days, but India's diplomacy is not quite over. Later this month, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be paying first post-Brexit Prime Minister. And his intentions are clear. The UK is thinking beyond Europe. It wants in on the Indo-Pacific, and India fits the bill. A massive trading machine with strong regional influence. That's how the UK sees India. So here's a quick roundup of who has visited India. First, the Pentagon chief, Lloyd Austin. Then Russia's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov. US climate envoy, John Kerry. And capping the summer will be Boris Johnson. What does this train of foreign leaders symbolize? India's rise. Its position of preeminence across the board. Just think about the scope. From Delhi, the democratic axis can keep a check on China. They can keenly monitor the Afghan peace process. And at the same time, keep an eye on Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. The bottom line is this: it pays to be a stable and prospering democracy. Who will the world trust to guard the peace in Afghanistan when it happens? A country that is one bad week away from a military coup, or the largest democracy in the world? It's a no-brainer. The world needs New Delhi to ensure everlasting peace in Afghanistan. But like all partnerships, this too is a two-way street. India too needs world powers in its corner, especially in defense. Russia's ties with India were forged over time. It is something that America will have to contend with. Take the S-400 missile defense system, for instance. Later this year, India will take delivery of the Russian missiles. And this will put New Delhi in America's CAATSA bracket. CAATSA stands for Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. It's a law using which the US can sanction countries that buy arms from Russia. So in theory, the US could sanction India once the Russian missiles arrive. But will America actually do so? That's an entirely different question. Joe Biden has certain foreign policy pet peeves: climate change, the Iran nuclear deal, and the Indo-Pacific. And he cannot achieve any of these without Indian support. So there is a growing caucus in Washington that wants a sanctions waiver for India. The CAATSA is supposed to target America's adversaries. Is that really how Joe Biden wants to categorize India? As an adversary? That's highly unlikely. The world's interests are converging with India's. And these are exciting times in New Delhi's South Bloc. World powers are courting the Indian leadership, climate, peace, defense, you name it, and they want New Delhi on board. If India plays its cards right, the summer of diplomacy could mark the beginning of Pax Indica, a world order built around India. We'll be watching this story. For the moment, let's talk about the pandemic. We're in the middle of a deadly second wave. In several countries, the caseload has exceeded last year's peak. What is driving these numbers? A mutating virus is the most obvious answer. But increasingly, the youth is now catching the virus. And for some, the consequences have been deadly. Our next report tells you why the young are not immune to the virus.
Last week, an April Fool's Day prank got out of hand in Belgium. Many young people gathered for a joke party. The cops had to resort to harsh measures to end it. A high school student had this message for the Belgian government.
We are all depressed. I'll be 18 in 2 weeks. We want to take advantage of our youth, which we do not take advantage of. We are all depressed, and after a while we are fed up. We want to do something with our lives. We want the government to think of us, so we came, not to annoy the police, but to show that we also have a life and want to enjoy it.
This attitude is proving to be costly for Europeans. The youth is driving the virus surge. Towards the end of March, more than 20% of the people infected in at least 9 countries were below 24 years of age. In Brazil, ICUs are now treating more younger patients than ever before. Last month, around 2,800 people under the age of 40 died due to the Wuhan virus. About 6% of Brazil's deaths in March came from the same age group, under 40. Doctors and experts are raising similar concerns about India. While there is no official data about age groups, more people below 40 are catching the newer variants in metros like New Delhi, raising the risk for the elderly. Despite the surge, a report says India's fatality rate remains low. Fatality rate is the ratio of deaths to confirmed cases. For India, it is below 1.5%. But it could rise. That's because vaccination is still limited to those above 45 years of age. What about the rest of the world? Only 14 countries and regions have opened vaccination to all citizens above the age of 18. But because of the lack of doses, not everyone has managed to bring the numbers down. Smaller countries like Israel and the United Kingdom have managed to bring fresh cases down with rapid vaccinations. New infection rates have flattened or declined in these countries, after at least 40% of the population was vaccinated. The United States, that has administered the most number of doses in the world, is yet to bring its caseload under control. By now, more than 673 million doses of vaccine have been administered in 155 countries. That is less than 5% of the global population. At this rate, both the young and the old around the world remain vulnerable. And it will take years for the world to defeat the pandemic. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The United States is facing a national crisis. It is running out of ketchup. That familiar red bottle on every American table slowly disappeared during the pandemic. It is one of the many unseen, unforeseen consequences of the pandemic. Ketchup producers did not anticipate the paranoia that followed lockdowns. While they were busy producing tiny packets, the customers shifted to bottles. Our next report tells you how America's ketchup Armageddon reveals the fragility of global supply chains.
What's burgers and fries without a lavish dollop of ketchup? For Americans, it's their second favorite liquid. First, of course, is oil. Ketchup sachets are measured in handfuls, not numbers. They always seemed to be in endless supply until now. Because ketchup Armageddon has hit the United States. Packets are running out in fast food chains. Prices are up 13% compared to last year. It's a gastronomic emergency and Americans are panicking. This is a country that buys 300,000 tons of ketchup. Last year, they spent $1 billion on it. At the center of this shortage is one company, Kraft Heinz. They hold 70% of the market share, but 150 years in the business could not prepare them for the pandemic. Heinz usually sticks to ketchup sachets. Their primary buyers are fast food chains. But after stay-at-home orders, the hoarders ran riot. Everyone wanted a ketchup bottle for their fridge. Heinz simply did not have any. Now that diners are open again, ketchup faithfuls are in for a surprise. A single sachet to go with their burger. That's plain scandalous in America. So the question is, when will ketchup finally catch up? Heinz will open 2 new manufacturing lines this month. This should expand output by 25% to more than 12 billion packets per year. The ketchup Armageddon will be averted in a couple of months. But America's favorite dip has taught us a valuable lesson. Our supply chains need an upgrade, much like our ketchup-laden diet. Remember the toilet paper crisis in early 2020? Manufacturers were simply not ready for the disruptions. As the virus went globe-trotting, iPhones disappeared from the shelves. The local meat suppliers shut shop. Soda makers ran out of hands. And then came the Italian curse. As we emerge from this crisis, it's important to build back better. Supply chains must tick 3 boxes: sustainability, flexibility, and transparency. In China, the supply chains operate behind a veil. They take the idea of blind trust quite literally. In this particular case, Americans paid for cultivating a monopoly. As long as Heinz pumped out ketchup sachets, everything was fine. But one hiccup and the great American meal was suddenly tasteless. The pandemic has changed our life in many ways. Our next trip to a diner may involve bubble seats and robot waiters. We may not be able to squeeze all our friends into a single booth, but what must not change is that dollop of ketchup. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Meanwhile, the South China Sea is heating up. American warships have been spotted at 2 locations, the South China Sea and the East China Sea. This is what one of them looks like. What you see is the American carrier Theodore Roosevelt. It has re-entered the South China Sea for the 2nd time this year. The American side says the warship was conducting routine operations, but observers see it as anything but routine. And the move is significant. It comes at a time when a dispute between Beijing and Manila is escalating. The bone of contention is this: the Whitsun Reef. On your screen is a satellite image of the Whitsun Reef. Hundreds of Chinese boats are stationed here, as you can see. The Philippines has spotted more than 200 vessels, 200 Chinese vessels, manned by China's maritime militia. And they're not out for fishing. For several weeks now, these boats have just been stationed here. The Whitsun Reef looks like a boomerang. The Philippines calls it the Julian Philippe. Manila says this reef lies in its territory, in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. On the other side, we have China. It claims more than 90% of the South China Sea. Plus, there are other contenders like Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia and Brunei. You could say the South China Sea is one of the most hotly contested regions in the world. 200 Chinese vessels in these waters is clear provocation. China says these boats are just seeking shelter from bad weather.
The Whitsun Reef is part of China's Nansha Islands. This reef and its nearby waters have always been an important docking point and wind shelter for Chinese fishing boats. Chinese boats staying here overnight and sheltering from the wind is reasonable and legal. The South China Sea arbitration ruling is illegal and void. China does not accept or recognize this ruling and firmly opposes any claim or action based on this ruling. China's sovereignty and rights and interests in South China Sea were formed over a long course of history and are in accordance with the international law.
Sadly for Beijing, nobody buys that alibi. That's because China's record speaks louder than China's words. For years now, Beijing has tried to grab territory by building and fortifying artificial islands, and now it is trying to reinforce these outposts by swarming the disputed waters with boats controlled by militia. Reports say China's goal is to establish an overwhelming presence in these disputed waters. Enter America. It is sending a message to China, deploying a warship in the South China Sea again. And Beijing is responding with its own warships. A Chinese aircraft carrier has passed through the Miyako Strait. This is off the southwestern coast of Japan. Now, China and Japan are locked in an island dispute of their own. They have contesting claims over the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. The tensions are indeed high. Today, the president of the Philippines released a statement. His spokesman called for a peaceful resolution to the standoff at the Whitsun Reef.
We'll continue to resolve the issues on Julian Felipe through diplomatic channels and through peaceful means. Whatever differences we have with China will not define our bilateral relations. It will not be an obstacle to the overall positive trajectory of our bilateral friendly relations and our deepening cooperation in pandemic response, including vaccine cooperation and in post-pandemic economic recovery.
China and the United States have sailed their ships into contentious waters. With no side willing to back down, this situation increases the risk of a military conflict. This is a developing story and we'll keep track. Meanwhile, the European Union's top leaders have embarked on a mission that is being called Mission Impossible. They are in Ankara in Turkey for some top-notch Turkish hospitality. And their host is none other than President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. By the time they touched down in the Turkish capital, the battle was half lost. Erdogan, you see, had a busy march. He was attacking women's rights and abandoning international treaties. Talks are not exactly the president's strong suit. So what is the EU hoping to achieve? Two issues top the agenda: migration and trade. Turkey is the dam that protects Europe from another wave of migration. In 2016, the two sides signed an agreement. Turkey was to house the refugees and prevent them from crossing over into Europe. But Erdogan thinks he's been dealt a bad hand, and now he's threatening to open the floodgates unless Europe pays up. So that was the most pressing issue for Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel, to convince Erdogan to honor the agreement. And we can't blame them for their urgency. The Turkish president is abandoning treaties left, right and center. And at this rate, Turkey could be out of the United Nations by the end of this month. So how is the EU planning to bring Erdogan to heel? By offering him exactly what he wants. Brussels has agreed to offer Turkey certain incentives. More money to look after refugees, a customs union upgrade and liberalization of visa rules for Turkish travelers. But what have they secured in return? Frankly, not much. Both EU leaders raised Turkey's abysmal rights record. They also criticized Erdogan's exit from the Gender Violence Treaty. But they seemed more interested in finding common ground than calling out the differences.
Turkey shows interest in re-engaging with the European Union in a constructive way. And we've come to Turkey to give our relationship a new momentum. And in this respect, we had an interesting first meeting with President Erdogan. And indeed, we discussed 4 areas in depth in which the European Union and Turkey would have both benefit from enhanced cooperation.
Recent months, we have witnessed a de-escalation. This is a positive development, which must be sustained and enhanced. We have told President Erdogan that the EU is ready to put a concrete and positive agenda on the table based on 3 pillars: economic cooperation, migration, and people-to-people contacts and mobility.
The EU wants an honest relationship with Turkey, even if that means overlooking Erdogan's rights abuses. They do not want refugees at their gates. They want peace in the Aegean Sea. Erdogan took one step forward in de-escalating tensions with Greece, and in return, the EU launched itself into the Turkish president's arms. And herein lies the problem with EU-Turkey ties. It is the classic definition of a love-hate relationship. Erdogan is the unfortunate reality that the EU must deal with. Strong words and deep concern do not unsettle him. Sanctions will, but the EU won't do that. Brussels is talking about turning a new page in its relationship with Turkey. But the page it is leaving behind is one of abuses and ruthless crackdowns. Here's what happened after the meeting earlier today. The EU leadership held a news conference. They took questions from the media. What about Erdogan? No statement, no presser, complete radio silence. In many ways, this sums up the difference between the EU's self-proclaimed values and Erdogan's Turkey. They can work together only if one side makes a huge sacrifice. And as we know, Erdogan is not big on concessions. Ramadan is just a week away, and there's a big announcement from Saudi Arabia. Riyadh has said that starting Ramadan, only those pilgrims immunized against the Wuhan virus will be allowed to enter the Grand Mosque of Mecca. The rule will also apply to those performing the Umrah and also those looking to pray in the Grand Mosque. Will it also apply to the annual Hajj pilgrimage? And is this the new normal? Here's a report.
For years, in order to attend the Hajj, a Muslim had to be in a state of ihram. He or she had to wear a special white clothing, cut her nails, not cover her face, not use cologne or scented oil. In 2021, in order to enter the Grand Mosque of Mecca, a Muslim must also be immunized against the Wuhan virus. Welcome to a whole new cautious world, where vaccine is your passport to travel and key to freedom, and where no exception may be made, even in case of a pilgrimage. Are you looking to perform Umrah? Well, there's news from Saudi Arabia. Authorities have announced that permits will only be issued to those who fall under at least one of the following categories. Number 1, you have received 2 doses of vaccine. Number 2, you have received a single dose at least 14 days before the pilgrimage. Number 3, you have recovered from the Wuhan virus. Saudi Arabia has said that the new policy will come into force at the start of Ramadan. How long will the policy last, and will it be extended to the annual Hajj too? We don't know, but here's what we can tell you. This template is on the way to becoming the new normal. The idea of vaccine passports is gaining steam, which means you may have to show proof of vaccination every time you travel abroad, every time you enter a country. This is new age immigration. China has already begun a health certificate program. It applies to all those traveling overseas. The digital certificate has records of a person's vaccination status and also Wuhan virus test results. In the United Kingdom too, there is an ongoing debate whether vaccine certificates should be made compulsory for crowded places like stadiums and pubs. Where does this leave those without access to vaccines? Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
Here is a story that affects each one of us. And here is the headline. India's ed-tech startup Byju's has acquired coaching center chain Akash. Do you know for how much? Close to $1 billion. $1 billion. That's almost how much lifestyle retailer Nykaa is worth, or fintech startup Razorpay or Lenskart. Today, 1 billion is the cost of a coaching center in India. And this is not a story about mergers and acquisitions. This is a story about the business of tuitions in India. A story of the failure of the Indian education system and how parents are being drained of resources. The company that bought Akash is called Byju's. It is nearing a valuation of $15 billion. Look at its investors: Qatar Investment Authority, General Atlantic, Tiger Global, Naspers, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Byju's competitor, Unacademy, is worth $2 billion. It is backed by SoftBank. You see, big companies back startups not for philanthropy but for profit. Private tuitions, it seems, is among the most profitable businesses in India today. They're profiting from your money and mine. How much do you spend on your child's education? The average school expenses of a child is around 65,000 to 1.25 lakh rupees annually. That is, if you're sending your child to a private school in a city in India. In 2015, ASSOCHAM interviewed 1,600 working parents in Indian cities. 9 out of 10 parents said they found it, quote-unquote, very difficult to meet their ward school cost. Enter private tuitions. They begin in kindergarten these days and end up withdrawing an exorbitant amount of money from your bank accounts. Byju's, for example, has courses for lower kindergarten students, LKG, tuitions for LKG students. It promises to, quote-unquote, build a strong foundation in basic concepts in a fun and interactive way. But isn't this exactly why we send our kids to kindergarten? To build a strong foundation, to learn and play. Why then do children also need private tuitions? When a child enters junior school, she inevitably joins maths tuitions. In middle school, she starts going for science tuitions, physics, chemistry, biology. Plans are postponed, weddings are skipped. Why? Because kids have tuitions. Indian high school students take tuitions for almost every subject: political science, philosophy, zoology, physics, sociology. Name the subject and there is a tuition teacher for it in your vicinity. 1 out of 4 students in India seeks help outside school. That's an estimated 71 million students taking private tuitions. And they spend an average of 9 hours in tuitions per week, which is almost 1.5 school days. And this is according to the Indian Human Development Survey. The trend spans across Indian states and income groups. Look at these figures. 89% of high school students take private tuitions in West Bengal. Tripura, 87%. Bihar, 67.2%. Odisha, 63.4%. Manipur, 54.7%. What is the cost of all of this? According to a 2014 ASA report, parents spend about 11 to 12% of the family's expenditure on coaching classes and tuitions. 11 to 12%. In mega cities, parents spend up to 3,000 rupees per month on tuitions. For middle school children, it goes up to 5,000 rupees. Indian families spend, and listen to this, Indian families spend close to 25,000 crores every year on private tuitions. This is according to an NSO report. And this number does not include coaching for entrance exams. And this is over and above the school fees, the school tuition fees. Why are we paying both? In short, to educate a child in India, a parent must send her to school, but also pay for private tuitions. Where does that leave a family's saving? Courses for IIT, JEE and NEET come with a price tag of around 1.3 lakh rupees a year. For a 2-year course, it goes up to 3.33 lakhs. Have you heard stories of parents mortgaging their land and houses to educate their children? Well, they're real. Providing for an education has become an ordeal for Indian middle class. For families in the lower and middle income groups, the situation is worse. Private tuitions are profiteering off us, and schools, on their part, are not really helping. The average class size of an Indian classroom is 60 students in one class, one section. The ideal number is 30. But in India, there is one teacher teaching 60 students in one class, leaving scope for one-on-one interaction and problem solving. And to top that, many teachers are untrained. And this crisis goes beyond Indian borders. Globally, 4 in 10 students take private tuitions. In China, the number is 5 in 10. half the number of students. In Japan, 70% of students take private tuitions by the time they complete middle school. In Malaysia, 83%, 92.8% in South Korea. The country spent 2.8% of their household income in private tuitions in the year 2006. What do these numbers tell us? Private tuitions is a booming business. It is selling dreams and squeezing families of their hard-earned money. Can you change it? Yes, you can. Push for a revamp of the public education system. Ensure that your country spends on teacher training. Emphasize on an all-round education in schools. And stop obsessing on test scores. That's a lot of food for thought. So we'll end on a lighter note with blunders. We all make blunders at work, and usually it's not that big of a deal. But for people like us, who are on camera, who deliver the news, a blunder on air is something that we all dread. What if the blunder is unintended and uninvited? What if a dog appears out of nowhere, steals your mic and runs away? I'm not making this up. This happened in Russia, and the internet cannot stop discussing it. So we decided to add this to our show and add to this conversation. Take a look at this.
It's being called one of the sweetest interruptions on camera. Russian journalist Nadezhda Shereshkina was preparing to update viewers about the weather when a golden retriever, intrigued by the microphone, barged into the frame, grabbed the mic and ran away. Watch how. This video has gone viral. It has made it to the Hall of Fame of reporting bloopers. But is it the funniest of all time? Well, the competition is comically tough. In 2015, this American reporter decided to talk to this majestic predator like it was a stray cat. In the end, she just felt thankful they were separated by a fence. Another news channel decided to terrorize its anchors by forcing them to handle a living snake. One of them thought it would be a great idea, only to end up screaming like a child. This other time, a news channel invited some reptiles on their show. An anchor who participated in the segment seemed pretty freaked out. In Pakistan, a journalist reporting at a slum saw a cow approaching him. Instead of relocating, he instructed the camera person to keep shooting. The result was this. From getting attacked by cows to interviewing buffaloes, Pakistan has no dearth of reporting bloopers. Sometimes the reporters even shake a leg. Watch how. In these tough times, there's a lot that divide us. Thanks to bloopers, we can all come together to at least have a laugh. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.